think Zed is basically right about the animal, the perspective on animals that we should change. Especially, actually, it's precisely because of the logic that Parolitis has derived or has discerned for human consciousness. This same mechanics of this logic apply to nature itself. Nature itself is kind of a demonic process in which, but let's say consciousness, human consciousness arises by the instincts becoming discontinuous, by, let's say, instincts decohering from the basic functionality of survival and conquest and whatnot, and sort of become drives into themselves. So the premise is that human consciousness, also abstracting consciousness, is a result of the decoherence of the instinct, which I think is not a bad idea at all. I think that's probably true even. It makes a lot of sense. You can imagine how it would have happened in this sense. But so what happens then is that this discoherence, discontinuity in the end finds a new coherence in which we call the mind, in which logic is a form of recohering what has been decohered. But what about if all animals, or let's say if mammals are also the product of let's say an excess of instincts that, just theoretically, that warm-bloodedness could have arisen in the same way upon cold-bloodedness as human consciousness has arisen from animal instinctuality, just by an excess of thing that wasn't useful for anything at all, but had to find a path for itself to not produce intolerable suffering, because that's what I think this excess theory makes very clear, that things take form often in order to not, be too strong for themselves, to not be too vigorous to exist. And this whole artifice is the same as these collapsing instincts, or colliding and sort of, I don't know if collapsing isn't quite the right word, but so for example, a cat may may owe its consciousness may owe its state of being to lots of to more like the instincts of more primitive animals decohering, and in some sort of fortunate arrangement by coincidence forming this plateau of basically pointless self-pleasing or self-mellowing activity, that basically whose only function is actually to not have this wild excessive drives. So a cat in this sense would be a containment of excess and all, but this can which fits very well to a cat, but in fact it fits very well to all animals and to all beings, that they are, I think I'm striking on something very profound here, that everything is just made of these, that nothing is in fact continuous except the most primitive beginnings of things. and that every manifest thing is actually a result of a broken continuity of drives or of willings to power, which then sort of fell. There were infinite possibilities of there was the absolute possibility of decohering the intensive, maybe what Schelling also called the I don't know what he says, the sort of the madness of drives, circular madness of drives before creation, something like this, where maybe every animal is a form of releasing existence from its mad circularity and its fundamental excessiveness, which is due to the A is not A. And then we can also see that the human consciousness in this, if it had formed in the same way, is sort of an animal structure. It's maybe also like predatorial, but also, you know, playful and graceful and seeking its own, you know, its own best form. And in any case, it would be a plateau on which has arisen on sort of the crater left by colliding excessive decoherent drives. So in this sense, then self-valuing becomes very much more important than will to power, because will to power would be sort of the unbroken drives, and well, also that would also include self-valuing, but a self-valuing is more gives a very good idea of what such a form does. It basically selects itself out of, and not actively like chooses, but its being is it's selecting itself out of this sea of broken drives and then once it becomes a coherent self-valuing, which values the massive chaos in terms of its own slightly less massive coherence, then still this exists within a pool of all sorts of different creatures that follow the same sort of path but very different particular paths. And then, well, this has the result of, you know, furthering the process of, again, these things get decohered, and again a chaos results, a great pain, from which again a form has to shape itself in order to be bearable for it to itself. And the same way with thought, and also now that thought has been existed for a while, it has changed, it has developed discontinuity within itself. Philosophy, the questioning could be seen as this discontinuity. And once more, it needs to cohere itself in a self-bearable form. It has, and value ontology and the demonic philosophy and the tectonic philosophy are all together forms of bringing again a form out of the chaos, because human thought at this point is just this excess of decohering drives, very obvious in philosophy forms, this excessive nature and this decoherence. But in the end, everybody is drawn inevitably to at least everybody who's capable of this excessiveness of thought is drawn in a sense to a new coherence, a new embeddedness, because that's what joy means, what actually being is. It's like every being it's not that it so much stands out from being with a capital B, from the itness, the universe, but that it finds a way to embed itself in it, become actually slightly less dynamic. It's not like the human or the life is the epitome of dynamism. No, the sun. That's ultimate dynamism. That's way too much dynamism. And then in the end, it just mellows down until on Earth you get so little, like reduced dynamism, that beings beings to themselves can, to an extent, emerge. Embeddedness. So there's first this huge, massive, raging chaos of primordial willings to power, which are following the same logic as self-valuing, but that's just not useful now to go into that. Within this rage, some lagunas are created. And this is also why humans have infinite access to rage and to violence, and to why violence always turns out to solve the problems, because it's all that stands between beings. Every being is separated from the other beings only by this excess of decoherent drives. And communication is this always, in a sense, violent, and in a, well, we might say nonsensical to a degree, since we have to put up with chaos, and we have to penetrate the chaos, and somehow through the chaos relate to another laguna in that chaos. Bridge building. I think my time is almost up. I think my point has been made. Sayonara, and have some nice eggs.